Hello, everybody. I'm Katya Noyes. I am the lead on the Workforce Development series for Buffalo CTSI. And I have a distinct pleasure today to welcome our guest speaker for the series on teamwork and research, Dr. Gloria Aidoo-Frimpong. Gloria is relatively new to UB. She just started as a assistant professor, but she actually has a long history with University of Buffalo. She's an alum of our program. She has a PhD in community health and health behavior. And I want to pass the microphone to Dr. Aidoo-Frimpong so she can tell us about her background and what kind of research she does and why and how she ended up working in research teams. Welcome, Gloria.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was such a wonderful introduction. And one of the things my research really, HIV prevention, we know HIV as a social disease. And so it's part of those that you really need systems and communities to be able to really address this work. And so that is really what brought me into that whole work where you need different partners to be able to really move that whole research forward. So that is me and the work that I do, heavily in HIV space, heavily in Black and African diaspora spaces. And so when you have to do this work, it comes with advocacy. And so that is what brought me into really this space of doing community-based research in that regard.
That makes a lot of sense. That's actually a very interesting way to frame HIV research. And so related to that, so we're talking about HIV, we're talking about sexual behavior, we're talking about intimate partner relationship. So these are the topics you don't just talk to people in the street. You need some kind of connection, trust, because otherwise you're probably not even going to get any answer from the folks. How do you work on building trust not only within your team, but also with those partners and stakeholders? How does it happen?
I think that one of those things over the years is really having conversations about processes. Because again, I am in academia and you're working with community partners that have different timelines. Academic systems have requirements that usually are very invisible to outside people are outside the universities. And even when you have community partners who are very experienced, those requirements sometimes can feel a little bit overwhelming. So I think that really in the beginning it's very important to not explain what just is required, but the why it is required. So that people understand that okay, these are the things we need to pull together. And so that when it shows up later, it doesn't feel arbitrary. That why is this coming up now? Right? Within this whole thing, we also know that there's, documentation, there's constraints, there's contracting. Being very transparent about those realities help actually prevent partners from interpreting that urgency as pressure or even disregard for their realities, right? And then also one of the key things is slowing down early conversations. That, that pressure to demonstrate progress really quickly, it's really important that we have very clear communication paths, very clear decision pathways, right? Showing up and having those conversations. I think those are really, really important. People need to understand where their roles are going to be. There's also going to have to be consistency in terms of how these things are coming. And I think we realized that even with the PCORI grant, when we were writing it, that community partners needed time to really consider how approaches will be perceived and how those approaches are also aligned with community values and protections. So those are really, really critical in that space. So for me, that's how it's been with this building trust process.
Very interesting. So you mentioned this PCORI grant. Can you tell us a little bit more so we can get some context information, who the partner were, what the topic was, and how you actually came up with this idea of this particular proposal?
So one of the things about the PCORI grant was for a very long time, because I do this work, was trying to extend my work into the community, because I do need the community to be able to do this work effectively. So meeting up with, the African Immigrant Collaborative, which are different groups of community organizations that serve the African immigrant refugee communities and across 6 different states, who have come together and realized the need to really centralize the work that they are doing, and also to have a very specific research agenda that serves the needs of the community. So this particular PCORI project actually came out of, one, my dissertation work, but also work that their community had done to try to really look at what is critical for the community. So it was really, serendipity. Me finding out research that, WhatsApp is really critical when it comes to research for African immigrant communities. Community also doing their work, and especially during the COVID time, and coming together and realizing that, we actually need to uplift this as a method, a scientific method, because for a very long time, there's been conversations about it's really challenging to recruit this population. It's really challenging to reach this population. And the issue was not that it's challenging. The issue was that it was a mismatch in methods of recruitment. And so where the community are versus what our methods were just different. And so that is what brought us together to really put this whole grant together. So me finding out from my research, they finding out from lived experience, and bringing those two together really brought this project. So the whole idea was to really put together, one, come up with a very formalized protocol, because also, again, the understanding that not a lot of people use WhatsApp or even understanding. Most international people, we know this. It's at the tip of the finger. We use it every day, but others don't know. And then it's like, okay, where do we start from? How do we do this the right way, in a way that is also very protective of the community and doesn't harm the community, is what brought this whole project together. So it took over a year of conversations, right, of putting together the pieces of what will this look like, then looking into the literature, what has been done and how has it been done and how has it served the community. So then those bits of pieces comes together to say, okay, right now we are in a strong place to be able to articulate this scientifically, to do that. So that was one of the things that, brought this whole PCORI project, where we are now, looking and actually developing the use of WhatsApp as, a research method for patient-centered research.
Thank you for explaining that. So that's actually a very interesting concept, that what we hear very common, that, this population is difficult to recruit. And what how you interpret it is that it's not that it's difficult, it's that we're not recruiting it correctly. That's I think, a very interesting concept. Sort of, rather than blaming the population, is change the approach in science. Yeah. I think that's brilliant. And then, so for the folks who don't know what WhatsApp is, that's an international free messaging app. And I know that our Chinese colleagues use WeChat, so it's the same version. It's not country specific. So I talk with my friends and family in Russia and many other places. It's just free, and you can do a video, and you can do a call or a text. But so what do you think, Gloria? What makes it more appropriate for this population? Why are they open to being recruited on WhatsApp versus any other way we typically do for research participants?
I think that one of the key things is the trust that is embedded in here, right? You mentioned one of the biggest things, which is it's free. People don't have to pay for it.
That's right.
So people usually in environments where internet is, very restricted, limited, expensive, technology became that really thing that anchored it, because you didn't need to use a lot of bandwidth.
That's right.
You easily talk to people, right? And so for them also, they are experiencing WhatsApp not as technology, they're experiencing it as everyday communications, community. So where the family communicates, you are coordinating every activity there. Faith groups share information, social support is there. that trust, it crosses, like you said, geography and lines. There is also that part where people do not really have to be overly literate to be able to use it. It's very easy to use. There's the voice function.
Every grandmother uses it.
Every grandmother, yeah, it's very intuitive in that way. They just need to press a button and send their voice notes, and see the information on there. So they are already used to this, right?
Okay.
And the learning curve is not steep, to say. They don't need to log in and all of those things. So that relational continuity is what it is. It feels very human. Plus, truthfully, WhatsApp uses numbers, right? So you have to know someone. Even when you're in a group, those groups are formed around mutual values or mutual
That's right.
interests. So it's not just random. So people know that, okay, the people behind these numbers are real people, not bots, right? It's people that you have access to. So all of those things actually come into it. It flows into it directly. Different from WhatsApp and Facebook, different from, what we call the Signal and Telegram and all of those things. WhatsApp has that. There's that embedded trust. Of course, they talk about end-to-end user encryption, which people genuinely believe in it, that, hey, my chats are encrypted, right? People prefer to do WhatsApp calls than to do regular calls, and you cannot fault for them for that. So it is an embedded trust in a system that has migrated from just being technology to an everyday feature in people's lives. And so you take the reset to where people are. You don't expect people to come to you. It changes that, yeah.
Yeah, it's so simple, and yet it's so elegant and so powerful. So I'm really, really impressed.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the trust with technology, which now that we're using a lot of apps, becoming a critical issue with people trusting technology and being able to use the technology. But there is also trust with partners, all right? And so you mentioned the organization you partnered with. So if you might, how did that relationship evolve? Did you literally approach them on the street? How was that building trust with an established organization worked from the research point of view?
So I think that one of the things has been mutual, admiration over the years. The fact that, they were looking at the work that I had been doing, reading the work that I had been doing. I am also reading the work that they have been doing. And, meeting in conference spaces. So, you go to conference, you present your work, people show up, people ask you questions, you engage. And so that was how it began, right? The interest, in looking at people who had done this work. And I think when it came to the HIV in African immigrant field, like names like Chioma Inaji, Kerani, Emmanuel Koku, they were like the giants in that area. They, really advanced this work. And so to be at a conference, to meet these people engaging with your work was truly, humbling. And then that is where the conversation started. Like, oh, I have this idea. Why don't we think about this? Okay, let's do this work. So that is, how it started. There's also that part about alignment. Like, are you aligned in values? Because it is very, very critical that, yes, you do this work among this community, but are the values the same, right? So that is one of the things that we had conversations about. And also it meant being explicit about boundaries, right? We talked about what, these projects look like in community and in academic spaces, and how to marry the two. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are very important points that you mentioned, Gloria. I would like to unpack a little bit the terms that you used, that you and I both know what they mean, but I want to make sure that our audience understand what they mean. So you talked about values, right? So can you give a couple examples again of specific values that you shared with those groups and how you actually had conversations about those values?
So I think one of the biggest things was doing work was to not re-traumatize the community in terms of making sure
informed. Yeah.
Yes, it's very informed. Like, we don't stigmatize because it's HIV.
Okay.
It's already a stigmatizing disease. So making sure that the language that we use around research was very respectful of that. that was one of those things, the respect for the community. And I think we both had that we knew that, okay, this work was critical for the community. Then also for me, I was someone who respected community expertise, that lived experience, and recognizing that they do work in that community and they also really uphold community voice in that work that we do. So it was very clear from the beginning in terms of how even concerns are prioritized and how research were being framed. Then transparency in terms of, hey, I think we can do this. Hey, I don't think we can do this. I don't think this is a goal at this time. I think this is a goal at this time. It was very, very clear that we were not dancing around each other. There were ideas where, I shared and they were like, yeah, this is a good idea, but for the community right now, it may just not work out because the priorities are different, right? Then there was also the shared labor. Research is intensive. Grant writing is intensive. To do it alone, you will feel the burden. So to know that, okay, there are moments where you have partners who are willing to do the work, even if they are not there yet, like they will support you. What do you need? Was really, really critical. And also, truth is, like, the trust is not static. It gets tested over time, over each project that you're doing. And there are times where you really need to renegotiate those priorities. That, the timelines need to be adjusted. It's like, okay, we said this, but, I'm reading this and I'm concerned. How do we approach this? And for me, it's also realizing that people are not afraid to ask questions.
For sure.
Those are very critical. So I was like, okay, we are in a place where we are aligned in the sense that there is respect, there's transparency, there's that expertise, and also just that thing of shared labor, that these are people who are really willing to work in the trenches with me.
That is fantastic. And that really correlates very well with the theory of teamwork, right? So we talk about psychological safety and safe space. So you can speak up about your concerns. You can raise opinions that may not be supportive of other people's opinion, but you have a way to communicate that respectfully. And the word respect that you use, I like that a lot. And I think applying it to community-based research is critically important. They're not subjects, they're partners. And making sure that our language, our process, all aspects of research clearly spell that out, that is critical. It's not always easy to do, but it's critical. And your example clearly indicates that. The other thing that you mentioned that I thought was fascinating, you use the word boundaries. So would you mind elaborating and maybe using an example of when the boundaries were discussed or crossed maybe and how sort of what happened there?
Okay, I think that so one of the things about boundaries is it's always, it comes up a lot in here, and I think that most of the time it's decision making, right? What community is comfortable with, what you're also comfortable with as an academic, right? That when it comes to, okay, when we are going to say we are really sharing decision, right? And consultation, like, for example, in one of our recent grants, we had to do a dissemination plan. And for me, I was like, oh yeah, let's just sit down and, work this out in 3 hours. And my committee partners are like, no, we need to talk to each of the partners because dissemination is going to look different. And I'm like, but we have 3 days to go. We can really write this in here, right? Like in 3 hours. That is me being very academically inclined because we prioritize speed. Like, let's get this through. But committee is saying we need to talk to each of them. What it meant was respecting that and saying, I need to sit tight and not overrule that and say, I am going to write it out because I'm doing work with community, right? Then there's also that communication norms, how those show up when we are having these communications. So the realization that not everything is going to be resolved in real time. That not every issue will belong in the group setting, that sometimes we would consult differently before we come
Privately, yep.
together, right? Then there's also the pace and availability. I think that there's always that expectation, unspoken expectation, that community partners are always available, or that urgency justifies intrusion. Let me call it that.
Yep.
And so being intentional about respecting work hours, consultation times, when partners need to engage their own communities. I think that those ones are really critical, because I feel like there are times where we tend to work the entire time, like academics.
That's right.
Each time we're responding to the emails, and you'd send a message and my partner is like, oh, I am on vacation till Thursday. And I'm like, okay, but it's a 2 hour, but recognizing that is people's boundaries, right? And also what the research would and would not ask of the partners is really important, because sometimes the administrative burden is a lot. They are not equipped. Those compliance, those documentations, and all of those things, navigating that to say that, okay, this is us and this is community, and really being able to bridge the two. So that is what it's been from my experience.
Yes, this all rings very true. And I think these are probably the aspects that deter a lot of researchers from working with community partners, because they don't feel adequately prepared to have these difficult conversations. They think that slowing down grant writing process is a negative aspect, without realizing that working with community improves translation, improves dissemination. So you may spend a little more time up front, but then the subsequent phases of research will go so much faster.
Yeah.
And so seeing that whole picture, and you describe it beautifully, those trade-offs and difficult conversations, and I'm very, very impressed with sort of how accurately you nail this important criteria: the respect, the trust, the boundaries, these negotiations. And I think you mentioned earlier, you started with a reputation, that you didn't just meet with people on the street. You knew about them. They knew about you. You pre-screen your partners based on these aligned values and aligned interests. And that's another very important aspect of community participatory research. You can't do it in the week before grant is due. Right. So if you haven't built it in the prior years, you can't force it, and you can't fake it, because funding agencies, especially PCORI, they can see through that. And that's why they require you to name the stakeholders by name. They're not just some people with certain characteristics. They're real people who are partners. So this is fascinating and very, very impressive, Gloria. I'm very pleased we're talking about this today. And so in your description of boundaries, I kind of hear it, and you were very graceful describing it, but that when everybody agree, it works beautifully. However, when people disagree or they don't respect the rules, the boundaries, there may be a conflict. And so, given that you're here and the grant is funded, I assumed you skillfully negotiated for the conflict. But maybe for the benefits of others, if you could use one or two examples of how, not what caused the conflict, but how the conflict was addressed once it was clear that the sides are not in agreement. What do you do?
Yeah. No, I think that part is always what I mentioned, that it's not always that everything needs to be resolved in real time, right? I think the first will be to slow the interaction, right? And usually there is, especially from my experience, the conflict escalates when people feel that there's that pressure for them to reach a consensus really quickly without being understood. So one of the things with, where we were, because I think there were just issues with systems alignment and community partner priorities. So one was being able to separate the positions from the underlying concerns. So it wasn't about, okay, who is right and who is wrong here? What is driving each perspective? because one side was responding to institutional timeline constraints, other side was responding to community responsibilities. They are speaking different languages, and I'm in the middle to try to understand, to communicate that. So it meant having meetings, right? So sometimes you have to shift the conversation away from consensus into clarity to understand, right? So you want to be very explicit. Okay, this is what it is. These are the flexibilities we have. What do we need to do? So even when people don't fully agree on the outcome, they understand the rationale. And so there's less resentment, right? So there was that space for the full disagreement to come up. Like we had meetings where everybody aired out what their issue was. Then we listened to also the assistant partners, so the academic partners, what the issue was. And so it was then that we were able to pinpoint what the actual issue was that the language was not translating. The language that, academic partners are using is not translating. What community partners are saying is not translating. So there was that space to voice that disagreement without penalties within that. And we also realized that process issue, if we had resolved it earlier, it wouldn't have reared its head. So it was more of a process issue, right? Rather than just the failure of that collaboration. And so realizing that, okay, we need to preserve this relationship, but we need to work with over time, because there was that recognition that our partnership was going to continue. We're going to keep working together. And working together means that I belong in an academic system and we need to work together with that academic system. So how do we do it? We do it by really naming what the issues were. And then how could it have been solved? And that was one of the things I really appreciated about the partners, that when we held the elder circle, it was not just the problems. It was like, okay, you've named this. How should it have been solved? Or how do you think they could have done better? And so taking that solution and saying, okay, so going forward, because our next grant, which we wrote, which was an Robert Wood Johnson, it was a bit more seamless. It was a bit more seamless because all I did, and I give a lot of credit to Pam. Is that her last name? Stewart's? I said this because Pam and I had a one-on-one conversation. I'm like, okay, explain this to me. What does this time effort mean? Like, what does it translate to in real time? So sometimes we say, 3% person effort, 5%. What does it mean in real time? What does it mean for the grants? What does it mean in terms of how many hours I'm going to spend with the grant? So that I can go to my community partners and say, hey, if my effort is at 5%, this is how much time I can give to the grant. That they understand. They don't understand 5% person time or a person effort. So really being able to understand those things and have that conversation. So that is how we were able to resolve it. Like really, there was the clarity part and then reaching a consensus. But again, there are times where there's no consensus, so you strive for clarity, where everybody understands what is happening.
That is really important. I absolutely agree with you. And I applaud you for actually being able and willing to slow down, because that's another challenge that we all experience in academia. We think that constant time pressure, every minute, the submission has to happen in time. And that's really difficult for our community partners to understand, because most of the time they have long-term goals, long-term plans, long-term visions. So the emotional intelligence that it requires from all the team members, and that is probably the skill set that we don't teach our students in PhD programs. We too focus on statistical methods, on research methods, right? And human side of teamwork kind of being neglected. And I'm very glad that you also mentioned that your subsequent grant was so much better, because that's, again, another illustration that teams form over time. They don't form like this in a second. They norm, and then hopefully successfully and efficiently perform over time. So it's, again, teamwork is another investment that we make, and it's a long-term investment. Interesting story. Thank you very much for sharing this, Gloria. Any other suggestions or recommendations that you have to share with folks who are working in teams or considering building a research team? What what do they need to know? What do you wish you knew when you started that could make or break the success of this experience?
I think that one of the things is, working with academic teams are usually you are on the same footing, right? You're on the same footing when you're working with academics because they also understand, you speak the same language
That's
essentially,
right.
and they communicate and it's seamless. I saw it when they were communicating with University of Minnesota. It was like seamless, right? Versus trying to communicate with community partner. But I think one thing wish I had understood earlier is that teamwork is not just about bringing the right people together, but it's about designing how that team will function before pressure sets in. So, that, okay, we have the same goals. So I assume, okay, we all have the same goals. So it's going to really lead to a smooth collaboration, and that shared goals are not enough without a shared process. That is one of the things. And also the fact that the success also depends on addressing structural realities upfront. Like, talk about it, timelines, reporting requirements, decision authority. They sometimes may feel secondary to the science, but I feel like they often are the ones that drive the conflict. It's not the scientific disagreement, oh, I want to use qualitative, or I want to use quantitative. Those are easily resolved. The issues become those, reporting, the decision authority, timelines, in here. No, naming those constraints does not weaken the collaboration, it strengthens it. For instance, now my community partners know that any grant, because of sponsor projects and all those chain, we need to have it ready at least by 3 weeks because of that chain. We have that understanding right now, right? Because they need time to. We didn't know at the beginning, now we know, right? But if we had named those at the beginning, maybe it would have, revised the timeline in here, right? Also, disagreement is not a sign of failure. Like, especially in cross-disciplinary, if you've worked with people in nursing, social work, like medicine, they approach things very differently. Even communication, the political scientists, because there's been times we've done projects where we needed people from those, sociology, they approach things very differently. And so that disagreement is inevitable. It will come up. So what matters is the fact that the teams as a team, you have a really clear way to address this. Because when you create that space, it prevents it from becoming a personal issue later, right? Then there's also the burden. This is very critical to me, like to pay attention to the burden. Like junior members, the staff, the community partners, they often carry that invisible labor that is really not reflected in the deliverables that we would have.
Yeah.
So as a team, you need to acknowledge that labor and also plan accordingly rather than assuming unlimited capacity. People really do not have it. And it's built that trust that we talk about in teamwork, it's really built through consistency, not intention. Like they pay attention to the follow through. Okay, so after this grant, that was it. This person does not reach out again. Oh, so that was it. But how the communications continue, how challenges are handled. So over time, those small repeated action, they matter more than any single decision. So for me, my recommendation would be treat teamwork as part of the work, not something that will take care of itself. Because when you build teams from the beginning, they carry you through, right? And that collaboration becomes a bit more resilient and also sustainable. So that is what, for me, I wish I had known. And, going forward, I apply.
Very insightful. Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned process. I think we have that passion that we share about implementation science. That's really all about process. How do we do it? Who does it? Right? It has nothing to do with vision for research or research question, but there are so many different ways how you can approach the same goal or approach the same task. And it matters. It matters how you do it in one setting versus the other. So for those of you in our audience who are interested in understanding more about process, look for the series on implementation science, and we can talk more about various strategies and processes and how to select and design the best ones. But for today, we're going to thank Dr. Aidoo-Frimpong. Thank you very much, Gloria. This was fascinating discussion. I learned so much. I have so much respect for you and your team, and best of luck with your work.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you for having me and to share these perspectives. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gloria.